So, it's been a minute since the last upload. Again. At least I took a shorter break than last time. But hey, just because I haven't uploaded in a minute doesn't mean I haven't been listening to a lot of music in the meantime. And I'm not gonna lie, 2022 has been a pretty solid year for music if you ask me. In fact, I'll even hit you with a hot take. I think this year has been one of the best in terms of music releases since like 2017-18. I mean, we've had projects from some of music's biggest names this year. I mean, the likes of Kendrick Lamar, Beyonce, Drake, The Weeknd, Burna Boy, Future. I mean, I could go on. But in today's video, I thought I'd give you guys a quick little recap on what I've been listening to this year and what's caught my attention the most. Now, keep in mind that my thoughts on a lot of these records are my opinion. Y'all are free to decide what you like and don't like. I don't tend to follow a set criteria of any sorts when discussing albums I enjoy. Just bear with me that this video is called My Favorite Albums of 2022 and not the best. Got it? Cool. Now, as I mentioned before, I think this year's been packed with a lot of incredible albums across many different genres. But to keep this video short and sweet, I've narrowed my favorites down to 5 records released in 2022 for this video. And then for part 2, I'll hit you guys with another 5 to round off my top 10 favorite records of the year. And what better way to start than one of the first standout albums of the year for me, Dawn FM by The Weeknd. Now, if any of you guys tuned into my review of last year's Super Bowl halftime performance, y'all know I've admitted to being a little late to the Weeknd show. However, with After Hours being one of my favorite albums from 2020, and probably my personal favorite from his discography, it was only right that I started off my first Friday of the year bumping Dawn FM from sunup to sundown. Now, I was really interested to see how or if The Weeknd would change his style and sound following his last record. And while I do still think After Hours is a better overall album, Dawn FM is still such a refreshing sound in the pop genre, packed with bangers from start to finish. I think from a conceptual perspective, it's definitely up there as one of my favorites of the year. I really enjoyed the whole purgatory radio station aesthetic Abel went with throughout the record, touching on themes of life, death, consequences, and such. And personally, I think it fits his melancholic songwriting and the current sound he's adopted very well. The production really does its job of pulling you into the experience literally from the opening title track and throughout the album, with more of the 80s synth pop sounds that made After Hours such a standout project for me. Now, if I were to pick my top 3 tracks off Dawn FM by The Weeknd, I'd have to give those to Sacrifice, Out of Time, and Here We Go Again with Tyler, the Creator. But if you did listen to the album yourself, what were some of your favorite tracks, and where do you think Dawn FM ranks in The Weeknd's overall discography? Let me know in the comments down below. Moving on swiftly to album number 2 on the list, and for a lot of hip-hop fans, this one might be a bit of a surprise, but I've got to give it to Vinyl Days by Logic. Now, here's a bit of a confession. Logic was actually one of the first rappers I ever started seriously listening to way back in 2016. In fact, I remember very clearly the track Flexecution from his mixtape Bobby Tarantino being the very first song of his I ever heard, and I became a fan ever since. With being a Logic fan, however, came its dark times, and after releases such as 2017's Everybody and 2019's Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, I had serious doubts if there would ever be a return to form for Logic. Yet, all of that changed in June of this year when he released his 7th studio album, Vinyl Days. And my God, what a project this is. Now, don't get it twisted, it's not a perfect record. It definitely has its flaws, like for one, the addition of one too many skits that dampens the album's momentum at times. But with those aside, it's been years since I've heard Logic this sharp with the pen game and production on a record from beginning to end. You have fast-paced, hard-hitting boom bap bangers like Tetris and Kickstyle, and on the flip side, you have more introspective, thought-provoking tracks like Decades and Therapy music to keep your ears tuned the whole way through. And speaking of the production, some of my favorite beats of the year are on this album, and I think Logic pays tribute to the old school hip-hop sound in a solid fashion with some standout features as well. Picking 3 tracks off this project was tough, I'm not gonna lie, but I'll give them to In My Lifetime with Action Bronson, Rogue One, and Vinyl Days with DJ Premier. But after Vinyl Days, I'm glad to see Logic back at his best, and definitely looking forward to whatever he has coming up next in the future. Moving on to number 3, and we're switching genres again to some good old R&B and soul with Gemini Rights by Steve Lacy. Okay, here's another hot take. I personally think Steve Lacy is one of the most underrated instrumentalists in modern music. To me, he's really brought a unique and refreshing sound with the guitar and R&B and hip-hop music in the 2010s, with his work being featured on projects from Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Tyler the Creator, to name a few. And while his last solo project, Apollo 21, didn't leave too strong of an impression on me, it definitely had enough tracks to keep me tuned into what his next move would be. And boy, am I glad that I did. Gemini Writes brings the term short but sweet to life, clocking in just under 35 minutes, yet bringing out some of Steve's best vocal and instrumental performances to date. It has the same infectious melodies and themes found on his debut record, but fleshed out in a much more charismatic and personal way. Steve dives into themes of heartbreak, love, and young adulthood over gorgeous and enticing instrumentals that have his style written all over them, and it's hard to not feel his storytelling through the incredible vocals throughout the record as well. I think the only skip for me personally is Cody Freestyle, mainly because the beat is a bit repetitive and isn't as strong as the others for me, but nonetheless, this is definitely one of my favorite R&B soul records of the year, and my new personal favorite from Mr. Lacy. Top 3 tracks off Gemini Writes for me don't get any better than Bad Habit, Helmet, and Give You the World. Seriously, if you have not checked out this album outside of Bad Habit because it blew up on TikTok or whatever, you're really missing out. Switching back to hip-hop now, and here's one that might have gone under the radar for a lot of you guys. Next album on the list is Learn to Swim by Redville. Maryland rapper and producer Redville is an artist who's been on my radar since 2020 after the release of his second album, Niagara. And even at such a young age, the record was packed with some amazing instrumentals and energetic verses from Redville that ended up making the project one of my favorites from that year. So when the album rollout for his 2022 release, Learn to Swim, began in March, I was more than hyped for what was to come on the new record. Learn to Swim is about growth, dealing with success, past reflections, and learning to keep your head above the water. These themes Redville dives into over lush, sample-heavy instrumentation that really helps to paint such a colorful image throughout the project. A great example of what I mean can be heard on tracks like PG Baby, which has one of my favorite beats on the album. Redville reflects on his hometown and newfound success over this nostalgic and bright instrumental that will definitely get stuck in your head after a few listens. Redville is definitely one of many artists inspired by the iconic Odd Future era of modern hip-hop. However, his style is one that he's definitely starting to develop into his own since his last project in 2020. And probably my favorite thing about Learn to Swim is that as you listen to Redville rap about his come up and road to success, you can hear the growth in his song structure and attention to detail in just about every track. Speaking of tracks, my favorites off this project include PG Baby, obviously, New Info, and Sky. So yeah, shout out to Redville with a solid hidden gem of an album, and always glad to see some DMV representation making waves in the music scene as well. Now, for my last pick, I don't think this one is much of a surprise either, but I gotta talk about Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick Lamar. Now, I totally understand why a lot of people were a bit let down by this album. I mean, it's Kendrick's first album in 1,855 days, and obviously people were expecting a lot from one of rap's biggest names. I mean, there's not too many artists still around today that have a discography as stacked as Kendrick's, so I knew the bar was already set very high for a majority of people. But despite the mixed opinions, I think some of Kendrick's best work is on display here, and I was very happy with the material we got on the album. Kendrick Lamar, to me, is truly a one-of-a-kind artist, and Mr. Morale was another example of what makes his voice unlike any other in the game. Whether it's heavy hitters like Savior with Baby Keem or deep cuts like Mother I Sober, Kendrick is the type of artist who always leaves something meaningful for the listener to really hear and dissect. Now, obviously the new record isn't packed with as many radio hit bangers like Humble or DNA like we got on the last project. Instead, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers takes us into the mind of Kendrick Lamar on a more intimate level we quite quite never seen before, and one I personally enjoyed exploring from start to finish. Tracks like Father Time and United in Grief are, in my opinion, some of the best in his entire discography, as once again, Kendrick's vivid songwriting and insane flows are center stage here. It's not my favorite record from Kendrick Lamar, but out of the masterpieces he's already dropped, to me it just continues to show how consistent and dedicated Lamar is with his craft. And as I mentioned before, not too many artists have an album resume as stacked and highly rated as K-Dot. And despite a lot of general opinions on the record, I still think Mr. Morale is a phenomenal project and definitely one of the best albums of the year for me. Standout tracks off of this one for me though are Father Time with Sampha, United in Grief, and Savior with Baby Keem. Basically what I'm trying to say, if Kendrick Lamar was to go on another 5-year hiatus tomorrow, personally I would be pretty okay with the album he's left us for now. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes part 1 of my favorite albums of 2022. Make sure to comment below some of your favorite releases of the year and subscribe to stay tuned for part 2. I won't make any promises for when I'll have that video done by, but hopefully by the end of the year, something will be up on the channel. Feel free to leave a like and follow me on my socials to stay updated and support the channel. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.